Hi there, I'm Dr. Jennifer Jackson. I'm a registered nurse and assistant professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. This is a quick video about publishing, so an introduction to like the broad concept of academic publishing. Why do we do it? What is it about? And I'm going to go through some specific examples of things that you can publish that are not either a full research study or an experiment or something along those lines. I have another video on what goes into a journal article if you're reporting an experiment or a study. So if you're looking for that information, I'm not going to touch on that much here. But I am going to give an introduction to like what publishing is, why we bother with it, and some general strategies for navigating different kinds of articles. So, important thing to start with is that academia is changing. Once upon a time, you just had to be a smart old white dude who could think big things, and you worked by yourself and you were a sought after genius, and that was amazing. So no shade to Albert Einstein because he has made immense contributions. But like that type of model of an academic doesn't really exist anymore, or it's fading quickly. So now academia is the place where we can create new knowledge about important topics. We can also tell stories that aren't being told or heard, or unearth things that need to be brought to the light. And so the idea of sort of being around in your tweed jacket and being smart in your office doesn't really exist anymore. In a university, everybody here is smart. You don't stand out by being smart because all of us are smart. What you do contribute is by being kind to other people, sharing your knowledge, and having good project management skills. So it's no longer a question of like, what is your level of brilliance? It's like, how successful of an operator can you be, and how well can you work collaboratively? Now, any science that's done is done in a team. You really can't do it by yourself anymore. And it's a lot more fun to do it as a team. It's a lot more enjoyable process. So when you're going through graduate school, for those studies or those pieces of work, you have to do each of the pieces. But once you're post-grad, you work collaboratively in teams, and that's the general way that research gets done these days. So when we come up with this information, we want to make sure that we share it. So for some people in your discipline, that might be a book, it might be journal articles, there's different book chapters, there's different conventions as to what's expected for different disciplines. But the idea is that you need to put your good ideas out into the world. They can't sit inside your brain all the time. You have to share your wealth and your wealth of knowledge and your experience. And so the way that's primarily done is publishing. And so academics publish journal articles in peer-reviewed academic journals. So this is a specific subset of the whole publishing industry. We have popular press books, we have newspapers, we have magazines, we have all these kinds of things. Academic journals is its own kind of lane that covers any discipline you can imagine. They focus on different subject matter and generally connect with knowledge communities in different areas. So some journals are international, but many of them are associated with, say, the Canadian Association of Critical Care Nurses. And so that is sent out to all their members, and anybody who publishes with that journal, their work is shared with that association. So you want to know that, go into it knowing that academic publishing is its own kind of subset of the publishing industry that has its own conventions. Now, it's not necessarily a good place. So academic publishing started in 1665 with Journal des Savants, but it continues now. There's probably hundreds of thousands of journals out there. So how we got to modern publishing, a broad oversimplification is that there's kind of two groups of people who got us to where we are now. And I think it would be considered a statement of fact to say neither of them are perhaps our best characters. So Robert Maxwell in the UK, he owned tons of newspapers and was known to run Fleet Street. He's Ghislaine Maxwell's dad. Yes, that Ghislaine Maxwell associated with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not going to go into that here, but Robert Maxwell fought a lot with his journalists, and he found that if he could get academics to write stuff for him, they would do it for free. So they were just so excited to see their name in the paper that they didn't ask to be paid for their work. And so he had a very low opinion of academics and thought if he just gave them the crumbs of publishing their stuff, they'd be happy. So he essentially started modern academic publishing. And from the get-go, it was you send your stuff in for free and to have the privilege of having it printed. Whereas he didn't have to pay as many journalists and he got copy for free. The other piece is from Arthur Sackler, who was the patriarch of the Purdue Pharma Sacklers in the United States, who were affiliated with OxyContin. So Arthur Sackler was not involved with OxyContin, he was a generation earlier, but what he did was merge publishing and advertising. So he found that in an academic journal, you could put ads alongside it, or have advertorials, or you could put research, but then you could also put an ad that looks exactly like the research next to it. So he used all these kind of marketing tips to infuse journal articles with ads, which is how they generated a lot of revenue. So now publishing is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but the people who write the articles don't get paid. The people who review the articles don't get paid. The people who edit the journals might get paid a nominal fee. But academic publishing is still a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I have a lot of problems with that. And I recognize like how this is a very corrupt kind of system. And part of me wants to just like burn it all down and, and opt out of that stream. However, if you want to be an academic at a university, you must publish. So there's the adage of publish or perish. That is very, very much still the case. Now, I think with rose-colored glasses, there are some positive intentions around this, in that saying that you need to publish means you don't just sit around and be smart all day. You actually need to contribute things to not only your knowledge community and your academic community, but more broadly, you need to give something to the world if they're going to pay your salary to be there. And also, publishing generally, like in nursing, it shows that you did some research if you're publishing like a full-length empirical journal article. And so it's not so much about the publication itself, it's the fact that you've done the scientific process and now you're sharing that information. So it's a signal that like you got some money, you built some partnerships, you found some new knowledge, you wrote it up, presented it, and here it is. So at its best, it can be kind of a metric of saying like you have to finish projects, you have to go through the entire scientific process and write it up. So you can't just kind of half start 8 or 10 things, you need to finish them and publish your results. And also you need to be making regular contributions to your knowledge community. However, publishing can also be a toxic thing. I accept that this is one of the things that I have to deal with if I'm going to be an academic. So no institution I've ever worked for has been lily white and never had any problems. And any institution I've been a member of, whether that was, things I did as a kid or places I've worked, like all of the institutions in the world have their share of problems. So you can push for change from the inside while still making sure that you have a role on the inside by meeting the conventions that are expected. So this is why we publish. For anybody who's in nursing or health sciences, publications are in academia what beds are to a hospital. This is the functional currency of the economy that is academia. And so publishing can be a bit fraught because whose work is it? Whose name goes on it? And it's not just about like who wants to see their name in this journal. It's indicative of like who's producing intellectual property and who is getting credit for their contributions, because all of that ultimately drives your career. So as I talk about the next pieces, it's really important that you're clear about what your publishing strategy for a study is going to be before it even gets started. Who's going to be an author on what? And you have to have those conversations right up front, because if there's misunderstanding, it can get incredibly toxic. Also, this is just very general information. So if you are a graduate student, you must talk to your supervisor before you publish anything. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have to be an author if you're publishing some of your own work, but you need to talk to them to make sure that you're following the conventions of your discipline and your department, and that you're not jeopardizing anything. Like saying, if you have a manuscript-based thesis, there might be specific rules about what you can publish and when, and you don't want to miss out on having that type of thesis because something didn't get published appropriately. So this is just very broad, high-level guidance, and before you publish, you need to look into more details and connect with colleagues in your specific area. Now, it's also important to say the world needs your knowledge. Your voice matters and your work matters. And we have a lot of like wicked problems that we need to solve, and we need your contributions to that. So I do encourage you to publish and embrace the opportunity to share what you've learned with the world. I think that this can be something that can make a big difference, especially now in a digital world where information can be shared, instantly across the world. Things like we saw with COVID-19, some of the, vaccine trials and that kind of thing were shared widely. And like, it's incredible we can do that. I think, we didn't have that kind of information during the bubonic plague, and we ended up in a very big mess. So it is amazing that we can share information, and it's great to be a part of that process. So there are different types of papers, and they have different likelihoods of being published. So I'm going to go through this table a little bit. So an empirical paper, what I'm talking about there is either like a full research study or a full set of experiments or something like that. So it takes a lot of work. It's very likely that it will get published. I've got moderate here. It might take a few attempts, but usually if you've done the science well, it will find a home eventually. You just have to find somebody who sees the vision the way you do. So that is a kind of bread and butter way of publishing. Formal reviews, now here I'm talking about a systematic review, scoping review, meta-analysis, meta-synthesis, something that has a formal registration and a very, very tightly refined process. Those take a huge amount of work, but they are extremely publishable, and they tend to have a very high potential impact. So within evidence-based practice, they talk about the rise and rise of the systematic review, and it's still kind of the foundational piece or the big flagship that you can put forward as a researcher. They are a lot of work though. Methods papers can be, if you can get them right, they can be really effective. The potential citations for a methods paper are immense, and they transcend discipline much more than any other kind of publication. So if you're writing about how to conduct thematic analysis, that applies to anybody who's using that method, not just the people who normally read, you know, the Journal of Child Psychology or whatever the case may be. So methods papers, if you are a methodologist or you're doing something different with a methodology, they can be a really valuable way to publish. If you can find the right place to get them, and find an editor who wants them, they have potential for huge impact. Opinion pieces, fast and easy to write. This might include a letter to the editor. Some places only take them if they're solicited, and there can be different conventions around that. Some journals, they don't publish any editorials unless they ask you to write it. Others will, you know, take responses from previous issues and that kind of thing. So these are a wild card. They're not necessarily something you want to spend a lot of time on, but if you have something to say and you're an established senior researcher, like, go for it. You never know how much impact these are going to have. So they're written and like no one reads them ever. There's others where you can have intense impact. So the idea that MSG is bad for you initially came from a letter to the editor. It was not from an empirical research study. It was from a letter to the editor, which was explored on an episode of This American Life, if you're ever interested. You can also do short reports or teaching tips. So these are great for pilot studies or for innovative educational techniques or like different ways of doing things that are maybe adjacent to big studies or are part of an educational process about the information from a big study. And they can be a good way to build up your CV if you are a novice researcher. And they don't take a ton of time. They can be really useful. They're often not paywalled, so anybody can read them, and they have the potential to actually like be widely used. Finally, we get to the discussion paper. This is a challenging one because many of the papers I recommend for my graduate students are discussion papers. They're some of the most interesting and insightful things to debate about. At the same time, almost no one will take them anymore. And so I suggest that unless you have a very strong sense that an editor, a specific editor at a specific journal wants it, say, don't bother writing a discussion paper. With the rise of systematic reviews and evidence-based practice, people only want to publish stuff that has an associated equator guideline. And so I won't get into those here, but generally it's a guide that that illustrates how you publish based on standard scientific conventions. So if it does not have an equator guideline, nobody wants it. I don't agree with this. I think this is kind of a shame because discussions of ideas can be very valuable, but people right now, the trend is if you're not presenting new findings, if you're just talking about the big ideas in the discipline, that's not good enough. So unless you know you can get it somewhere, I would avoid discussion papers for the time being. So I've got some samples of different things that I've written related to this, and I'm using these just because I can speak about my work with credibility. There's tons of people who have done lots of great publishing in this space. And if you go to any journal website, you can see, you know, a collection of like what different options they publish and find examples there. So this was a piece where we used Twitter, during a conference with nursing students. And so we talked about it as a technique for professionalization, and we looked at what some of the tweets were and how we talked and taught about social media at the time and provided some context there. So this was an overview of what we did and how we made it effective and different things that we came across. So we did ground it in evidence around social media and the professionalization of nursing students, but it was also kind of a case study talking about what we did at a conference, that it was effective, and that we encouraged other educators to continue doing similar things. This was a fun one. So we started using a WhatsApp group in our office, and I published about the WhatsApp group. And so I talked about a little bit of literature relating to group chats, which are now ubiquitous, but at the time it was kind of a new thing. And we talked about pros and cons of having a group chat and how it was administered, and what we did if somebody posted something that was inappropriate and that kind of thing. So this was a very short, I think this article was under 500 words, and I was under no illusions that I was going to change the world with it. It was just putting something out there saying, hey, this is a way for international graduate students to connect. Oops, there we go. This was an opinion piece I wrote. This is one that I think of as one of my rage publications. So sometimes things really, really upset me, and I try to wait until, as my friend once said, my reasonable self returns. And so sometimes this is like the write-up of, this is what I wish I would have said in the moment when that thing was said. So this one was published in the BMJ. It's about, in interprofessional care, why do we need nursing research? And so I was basically calling out the idea that if we don't have that, like, all our research is done in teams, so why do we need discipline-specific research anymore? Fundamentally, I think the assumption was, yes, our research is all done in teams, but those teams are all led by physicians. And so this was talking about how we have to have our own epistemic knowledge base if we're going to be a profession, and on and on. So it was a good fit because it was something I was upset about, and it also was a chance to talk about like the really, really nerdy kinds of things that I like to think about sometimes, but it wasn't worth a wider audience or an empirical study at that point. This is an example of a teaching tip that I published with some teaching assistants. So we talked about how we use growth mindset feedback, and also how we created a template that allowed for a little more standardization of feedback across different markers, or different people evaluating student work. So we wrote up what our techniques were and shared them, so maybe other academics could get the benefit of using that approach, because we found it worked really well for us. So when you are publishing, be prepared. You will be rejected. You will be rejected. It is like being on Tinder, which is why I have a photo of it there. Like, rejection is a guarantee. So do not put all your hope and faith into the fact that this journal article is my total value as a person, because A, it's not. None of your work is your total value as a person. And B, rejection can be completely arbitrary. You know, it might have nothing to do with you, which is, I think, quite consistent for rejection across all domains of life. So know that if a journal doesn't take your paper, it doesn't mean it was written badly or that you're not a good academic. There might be some feedback about the writing or something like that, but it maybe just means you need to find your people publishing wise, and this isn't them. So that's completely fine. Also know that publishing takes a long time. So especially if you are doing a manuscript-based thesis, you need to take this into account. You have to talk to your supervisors about what is expected, like, for your manuscript-based thesis to go forward. Do the manuscripts have to be published? Is it okay that they're submitted? Can they be draft form? What is required there? So make sure you look into those things before you do any publishing, if that's the situation you're in. it takes at least a year to publish anything, unless you have like a world-changing breakthrough that you can get fast-tracked. It's going to take at least a year. So when you write an article, you have all your collaborators look at it. You edit it and edit it again and edit it again, so that, you know, if people have written different chunks, you get it all into one cohesive voice. So you've got it all ready, you send it to a journal. From sending it to a journal, it can take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of months for them to tell you either we've rejected it or we're sending it for peer review. Once it goes to peer review, they send it to like 2 to 3 experts in the field. They read it over and provide feedback. Then the author gets that feedback. They have to make changes to their article, pass the changes in, then peer reviewers have to review it again and say, were these changes made satisfactorily, and do they, you know, does this article reflect a valuable contribution to the science? And that process can happen 3 or 4 times before something is published. So it goes back and forth between reviewers and authors. Then, yes, okay, it's going to be published now. It has to go through a copy editing process where an editor goes through it. And you usually have like an editor who's making the copy and getting it into the journal formatting. And then you have an editor who works with the journal to check the subject matter, make sure, you know, all the spelling and everything is okay for the technical terms and that kind of thing. Then your article goes to being available online, usually. And then from there, it's eventually, if the article still publishes like a hard copy, it will go online first, and then it will come out in a hard copy edition as soon as they have space to do that. Articles can be delayed that way because they might say we have 120 pages and those pages are full. So you have to wait your turn until your article can be printed. So they've started offering the like online first version to overcome that and to make the process go a bit more quickly. Printed journals are becoming less and less common. So now sometimes if it's printed online, like that's it, you don't have to wait for a paper copy. But there's different perspectives on this. So it depends on which journal. So how do I pick a journal? Your organization or your institution might have publishing agreements. There's a few different things to think about here. Which group of people do you want to talk to? Where do you want to create your influence? What publishing strategy do you want to have? Do you have a lot of resilience in you that you can start at a high level journal and work your way down if you get rejected? Or are you a crispy, burnt out grad student who doesn't have anything left and you want to just send it somewhere where they're going to take it? Either is fine. You just have to know and discuss with your supervisor, like, what kind of strategy are you going to use? Make sure you don't end up with a predatory publisher. You can Google those. There's tons of resources about them explaining what they are, but it should never cost you money to submit an article. There are some journals that if you are going to publish with them, you have to pay a publishing fee. And I don't agree with this, but this is how it goes. But the reputable ones only want you to pay after they have decided to accept your article. Predatory ones want you to pay as you submit your article. So that is an immediate red flag. If they want money up front, do not publish with them. Like, absolutely do not. Because they're going to fleece you. So stay away from that. Again, this is another place it's good to talk to a mentor, because somebody who's had more experience will be aware of all of these issues, the sensitivities around them in your discipline, and can help guide you in the right direction. And also, don't let publishing be the only way that you share your work. So I also, I'm a little behind, but I generally try to put out lay summaries and blog posts of all my work on my website, especially when it's been funded by public money. I think I have to make it accessible for anybody who wants to see it. And while I certainly will send journal articles to anybody who asks, sometimes they can be quite dense and technical. So it's nice to also have something that's a little more accessible that people can see. That said, you have to publish the journal article first, then do this. And this type of work of like sharing through other channels is insufficient on its own. It needs to be accompanied by publication. Now, I have known some people that have been very disillusioned by the whole publishing industry, and I can really understand where they're coming from. That said, if you are not publishing in academic journals, you will not have an academic career. I've seen some people that posted on social media and said, I refuse to publish anywhere that does not offer free open access. It's like, okay, you've probably cut yourself off from 90% of the journals in your discipline, and probably from 99% of the reputable, high quality, well-read journals. And so, not saying that's right, but that's a reality of publishing. So anytime I see somebody who says, I'm not publishing in anything except free open access, or I don't want to gatekeep any of my research, I'm sharing all the results on a website like Medium. Within 6 months to a year, those people are no longer in academia. I've never seen anyone build a sustainable career off those approaches to publishing. So if publishing is something you just fundamentally cannot get on board with, academia is not the place for you. And that doesn't make you wrong, and it doesn't make academia wrong. It's just to say you're not going to get a good alignment there. So industry partners await, and you can go and make way more money off doing that. So there are some risks and pitfalls with publishing, and I'm not saying it's the most savory process in the world. However, as academia sits today, this is the way that we communicate information, and this is how we do it. So if you want to be on board, this is the approach you need to take. And so I think it's good to go into it with eyes open, being aware of these issues, and finding ways to share your work in a high quality venue that is respected by other experts in the field, and also making it available for anybody who wants to learn more about your topic. If you could balance those things, I think you've got a productive career ahead of you.